4070 Ti's cost their MSRP of $800 still. This is a 4070 Ti Asus Tough Gaming OC that we're testing in this video. And we're testing it up against what happens if you delete the Ti. So if I delete the Ti, the price drops $200. But what happens to the performance? Is it worth it to save the money? Or if you're looking at the 4070 at $600, is it worth it to spend the extra money on the $200? And some of you guys are like, can I just not buy one of those? Can I buy an AMD GPU? We'll give you a lot more final thoughts on that in the end. But if you are settling on the NVIDIA products, right now these are the prices. One thing you can do to try to afford them is to upgrade your earning potential. One of the best ways to get a raise is actually to jump to another employer, and you could do that using the resume templates linked for free, completely free in the video description and pinned comment. These come to you from today's sponsor, Hubspot. I absolutely love when a sponsor will give you something completely for free, especially when it can be of value to you. Now, if you want to switch up your career, you could jump into some of these resume templates. I really like these. So as a teacher, I've learned that it can take, how should I put this? Very specific instructions to get good results from your students. Now, this is a well-known thing you need to see. So what I really love about these resume templates is how clear it is. First of all, there's a variety of them, but how clear it is what exactly you should put where. The instructions are very clear. They are concise. They are easy to understand, and you can fill this in. And like I said, there's a variety tailored to different roles that you might be applying for. So again, massive thank you to today's sponsor, HubSpot. Links for free in the video description to help you upgrade your earning potential using these resume templates. Let's jump into the benchmarks and I'll give you some final thoughts on the end. Can't overstate how many games will be coming out using Unreal Engine 5 over the next several years. And right now, all we have to test, though, is Fortnite, which is developed by Epic, who also develops the engine itself. So to be clear, we're not trying to test out Fortnite here specifically, although we are doing that. We're really looking at turning up the settings beyond what you would normally do in a competitive shooter to look at how these games run, well, how these graphics cards run Unreal Engine 5 in an actual game. This is the 1440p Epic preset. And well, one of the big deals with Unreal Engine 5 is the Lumen lighting system, which is kind of a software-based ray trace lighting system. You can also hardware accelerate it. That's an option in the menu, and I have turned that on in this particular test, although we'll also look at tests with it off and different resolutions. But basically, the game completely maxed out at 1440p Epic settings RT on. We see that the RTX 4070 is averaging a little bit below 60 FPS, and the 4070 Ti is averaging in the upper mid-60s, so that is a noticeable difference there, although it is only a 16% lead on average. I also tried reducing the settings here a bit to high. At the high preset, it still has Lumen and Nanite and virtual shadow maps, the big Unreal Engine 5 features, but it's turned them down a bit along with some other settings. Here we can see both GPUs doing much better. We're averaging almost 100 frames per second, kind of in the upper 90s on the 4070, and well over 100 FPS on the 4070 Ti with a 17% better average FPS on the 4070 Ti. Now, in some tests, we will see them spread out a little bit more than this. This is a little disappointing, honestly, to only see a 17% lead here, but at least both GPUs are giving you a high frame rate. Now, if we try to go up to 4K at the Epic preset, this is not even using the hardware accelerated ray tracing, which would be even more demanding. The good news for the 4070 Ti is it gains a 21% advantage over the 4070 at these settings, possibly maybe a larger memory bus being of benefit at the higher resolution. But we are seeing not the most amazing frame rates overall, with only about a 40 FPS average on the 4070 Ti and only a 33 FPS average on the 4070 non-Ti, so neither of these GPUs do an amazing job at 4K native resolution. Now, if you wanted to use DLSS quality and just max it out, notice I've done two things here. I've turned the hardware accelerated ray tracing on, which is honestly not a huge performance hit. It's a pretty light ray tracing workload, but we've also upscaled. So we're using the DLSS quality upscaling, which renders the game at an internal resolution of 1440p, and then it tries to output a 4K-like image. We're now seeing about a 47 FPS average on the 4070 and about a 54 average on the 4070 Ti, giving it about a 15% lead in this testing, and the 4070 Ti is a lot closer to that magic 60 FPS number, although it's not there. Now, let's go ahead and jump into an Unreal Engine 4 game, because tons of current games are in Unreal Engine 4, including Returnal, but I also want to look at games that are PS5 exclusives on console that then have a PC version, and Returnal is an example of that. Here we see at 1440p epic settings in Unreal Engine 4, not 5, and again, PS5 exclusive game on console. We're getting good frame rate numbers here, and they're also a bit more spread out. We see the 4070 Ti with a 24% lead on average, and about a 95 FPS on the 4070 and about 118 FPS on the 4070 Ti. This game does have ray tracing available, but it's not part of the Epic preset, so this is not using any of the ray tracing features. With that in mind, going to 4K and leaving it at the Epic preset, we actually see the 4070 close, but not quite at a 60 FPS average, more like about 56. And we see the 4070 Ti comfortably above a 60 FPS average, averaging 70 FPS, giving it a 25% lead over the baseline 4070. So this is definitely an example where both GPUs are actually very playable at 4K, although the 4070 Ti is much more comfortable at a native 4K resolution. This game does feature DLSS, and we could have used it. But let's go ahead and move on to another PS5 exclusive on consoles that has a PC version with Forspoken. This is the Ultra High preset, which does include ray-traced ambient occlusion and shadows, and both GPUs are delivering good performance here. 70 FPS average on the 4070, about 84 on the 4070 Ti, with an 18% lead for the Ti version over the 4070 baseline version. Now, what if we change the resolution? So now we're looking at the 4K resolution, still at the ultra high preset. Now the 4070 Ti has a 22% lead over the baseline, although neither GPU is doing great here. 37 FPS on the 4070, 44 FPS or 45 FPS on the 4070 Ti. That's a 22% lead, but neither one's doing great. You could use DLSS here, but this is definitely a game that's punishing on memory, and I think at the 4K setting, we may have been spilling over our 12 gigabyte VRAM buffer on both GPUs. Another punishing PS5 game that's on PC is The Last of Us Part 1. This is also very heavy on the VRAM usage. At 1440p Ultra, this was tested on patch 1.0.2.0. There is a newer patch out now, but as of the time of testing, this was the newest. We're seeing a 20% lead for the 4070 Ti over the 4070, although both are giving us good averages with about 75 FPS in this scene on the 4070, around 90 on the 4070 Ti, although there are more demanding areas of the game. This has just seemed like a very typical early scene in the game that I could measure. Now, if we go up to the 4K Ultra setting, notice the system RAM usage goes up. I think VRAM is spilling over, and I've seen this in other testing. So this game at 4K can use more than 12 gigabytes at the native resolution. The 4070 Ti is only leading by 13% here. I think both of them are being held back by their VRAM. In fact, on the 4070 Ti, you're seeing some stuttering on the frame time graph, which I think is caused by that VRAM spillover. The 4070 can see that as well. So both GPUs struggling a bit at 4K there. Now, Plague Tale Requiem, while it's not a PlayStation 5 exclusive, it is a current-gen console-only exclusive. And at 1440p Ultra, both GPUs doing well here. 76 average versus 95 average, and that's a 26% lead for the 4070 Ti, so one of our best showings relatively for the 4070 Ti. Or you could look at it as one of the worst showings for this 4070. You know, it's further behind, but both of them doing well at 1440p. If you move up to 4K Ultra, though, neither GPU is getting you a 60 FPS experience. We're looking at more like 40 FPS on the 4070, about 49 FPS or so on the 4070 Ti. Depending on the scene, some are more demanding, some are less. It's a 23% lead for the 4070 Ti over the 4070. I will mention that not only does this game feature DLSS Super Resolution, it also features DLSS 3 frame generation. I would enable both of those, and then both of these GPUs would be giving you a very comfortable experience in that game, since it does support those features. Now, Resident Evil 4 is a very recently released game that is very VRAM hungry, although this is the RE engine, so this is not... also, by the way, Plague Tale Requiem was a custom engine as well. Both GPUs performing well here. The max preset does have some ray tracing, a little bit of reflections. 20% lead for the 4070 Ti, averaging about 98 FPS on the 4070, about 118 FPS on the on the 4070 Ti. Now, jumping up to the 4K resolution, the 4070 is averaging right about 60 FPS, a little bit below at times, more like a low 70s average on the 4070 Ti, with giving it a 24% lead. This is also a game that, again, is very VRAM hungry, and you can see some reduced performance at times, or even crashing when they do spill over that limit, but they're both doing okay here. But let's go ahead and move over to the Callisto protocol. This one's Unreal Engine 4 again. We're looking at the 1440p Ultra settings, and here we're seeing the 4070 Ti once again stretch its legs a little bit more with a 28% lead over the 4070 non-Ti. Both of them have some pretty weak 1% lows, but that's just how Callisto protocol is. It's one of the best looking Unreal Engine 4 games, but it can be quite brutal on the performance. But the overall averages here are quite good, with an over 100 FPS average on the 4070 Ti and upper 80s average on the 4070 non-Ti. So both giving you good performance in Unreal Engine 4, but a pretty good lead for the Ti version. 26% lead at 4K Ultra. And this time, neither one is just giving us amazing performance, especially during this corridor here. This place is a very demanding section of the benchmark, and there are areas of the actual game like that, although much of the game is more like these other hallways that we're seeing here. And in these other hallways, we're seeing the 4070 Ti usually actually able to stay above 60 FPS, with the 4070 more frequently below. So once again, we're seeing that at 4K, another example of the Ti version giving you enough of a bump to more comfortably stay around a 60 FPS average or over it, whereas the non-Ti version struggles a bit more there. Now, let's look at Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, which is on this developer's, again, in-house engine. We're looking at the 1440p balanced preset, not the extreme preset, because I think that's more typical of how people would actually play a competitive game. Also, if you play Warzone 2, it's using the same engine, so GPUs would perform similarly, but I'm using the game's built-in benchmark here. 18% lead for the 4070 Ti, so not super impressive there if you're paying the extra $200. Now, if we go up to down to 1080p balance, notice I am testing at 1080p here, because some people who are more focused on competitive games, instead of going with a 1440p monitor or even a 4K monitor on GPUs this expensive, might actually go down to 1080p with a really high refresh rate, in which case the 4070 Ti is getting you closer to 234 FPS average, more like 202 on the 4070. They're both really good, but it's giving you a better result for sure on the 4070 Ti. And if we move up to the 4K balanced preset, we see the 4070 Ti pull a little further ahead with a 22% lead. Now, both GPUs giving actually very good performance when you consider the fact that it's 4K, although remember this is 4K balanced rather than the extreme preset. Also, this game does feature DLSS super resolution, so you could upscale to get an even bigger performance bonus, about 111 FPS versus 91 FPS on that result. Now we're going to move over to Cyberpunk 2077. And we're going to use this game, we'll look at its just actual performance here at 1440p Ultra. And I cut out a bit of the benchmark run. You don't need to see the whole thing. That's what we've done on most of these here. But we're seeing a 25% lead for the 4070 Ti. So again, one of the better results, although not atypical. We have seen others like that. The 4070 Ti is averaging around 101 FPS versus about 81 FPS on the 4070 non-Ti. Now, if you go up to 4K Ultra, both GPUs just get absolutely crushed. So I tried enabling DLSS quality to actually show you more like how you might try to use them. And interestingly, we see a 30% lead for the 4070 Ti versus the 4070 here. Although neither one, even with DLSS quality enabled, where it's rendering internally at 1440p, neither one is actually getting you a 60 FPS average, with more like 56 versus 43 on the averages. But what I really wanted to use Cyberpunk for here was to showcase ray tracing performance. Cyberpunk has a lot of ray tracing features. Now I'm looking at Ray Tracing Ultra. This is not the path tracing mode of RT Overdrive. This is the old maximum preset, where we see the 4070 Ti with a 26% lead, although it's like 48 FPS versus 38 FPS. So it's not an amazing performance for either of them. meaning that you'd probably want to actually use upscaling. So if we use upscaling, again, this is DLSS quality, although using 1440p as an input resolution. So it's a 2/3 scaling there. I forget exactly what number that'll get you. But we're definitely rendering below 1440p internally. Upscaling it, you're getting about an 84 FPS average or so on the 4070 Ti and more like around 67 on the 4070. So the 4070 can average over 60 FPS. It's a 23% lead for the 4070 Ti though, and it's certainly getting you a higher FPS experience in a heavy ray tracing game. Now, I did want to test out some other APIs, so we're looking at God of War here. While I was focusing on newer and heavier games, God of War is not particularly demanding, although it's not super easy. But at 1440p Ultra, we're seeing a 20% lead for the 4070 Ti over the 4070, about 132-ish average versus 110 average. Both of them doing very well here, but again, this is a DirectX 11 game. It's one of the newest and best looking DirectX 11 games, whereas everything we've looked at so far was DirectX 12. Thought I'd kick it up to 4K resolution to see how they do. 4070 Ti is a 21% lead. It's, 80s, lower 80s versus upper 60s on the results here. Both of them performing very well, very playable. Even the 4070 non-Ti, will be over 60 FPS much of the time. And the game does feature DLSS, so you could get an even bigger boost there if you wanted to use that. So especially in, I guess, games from a couple years ago or older, the 4K resolution is going to be easier for these GPUs to handle. Also, before we finished up here, I did want to test out a Vulkan game. Now, Red Dead Redemption 2 here is running at its maximum favor quality preset, slide it all the way to the right, and we see the 4070 Ti is giving us a 22% lead. So nothing really out of the ordinary with Vulkan. This game can run in either Vulkan or DX12. I have just selected Vulkan for the sake of testing Vulkan in a game that people actually, play. And we're seeing 22% lead for the at 1440p. So what happens when we bump it up to 4K? Well, when we bump it up to 4K, the 4070 does usually stay over 60 FPS, although not by a huge amount. And the 4070 Ti is often over 80 FPS. Both of them very playable, very good experience here at maximum settings at 4K. 19% lead for the 4070 Ti. Again, this game does feature DLSS 2, so if you're using these GPUs at 4K, you might want to seriously consider using DLSS quality to get an even bigger bump, and then you get a higher refresh rate experience. Now that we've established the relative performance, let's get into which of these you should buy. If you divide 800 by 600, you get 1.3 repeating. What does that mean? It means that the 4070 Ti at a price of $800 costs 1.33 times the price of the $600 RTX 4070. And what do you get for the money? You don't get a 33% improvement to performance, meaning it is not 1.33 times faster, but it costs 1.33 times more. It does not have any additional features. They both have the new features like AV1 encoding. They both have the improved energy efficiency of this latest generation of GPUs. They both have frame generation, DLSS 3. They both have 12 gigabytes of VRAM. And I can tell you that while getting only 12 gigabytes for $600 doesn't feel great, I can tell you that getting only 12 gigabytes for $800 just feels bad. So that's definitely something to consider. Now, how much faster is the 4070 Ti? We saw a variety of results in the benchmarks. It was as slow as only 15% faster. It was sometimes as fast as 28% faster. The reality falls somewhere in between. Now, I've benchmarked a ton in my video, but I really like looking at like a meta-analysis from some other outlets. So 3D Center has a cool result where they took a bunch of the launch reviews of the 4070 and they input their results for the 4070, looked at how much faster a 4070 Ti was, along with a variety of other GPUs here, if you want to look at some other comparison points, and then give us an average result. So this is taking more reviews than any one review outlet like mine or any of these could do, and then it's aggregating the result. And at 1440p, they're seeing that the 4070 Ti is on average about 21.1% faster. And that's in rasterized performance. And then at 4K rasterized performance, we're seeing about 23.7% faster. And I think that's due to the 4070 Ti having a bit wider of a memory bus, which can help a bit more at those higher resolutions. But again, we're seeing at best 24% faster on average for 33% more money. So if we're asking which of these GPUs is the better value, better relative to each other, we're not saying best value or great value or as good of a value as we would have wanted, the 4070 is clearly the better value. But should you always buy GPUs based on value? That's a good question, because the other way of looking at it is you want a certain level of performance, especially based on your monitor resolution. So I think both of these GPUs deliver very good 1440p performance. And the 4070 Ti gives you a little bit more headroom over that 60 FPS mark in the heaviest duty things. Like we saw Unreal Engine 5, Fortnite, maxed out settings, a little below 60 FPS on the 4070, but more noticeably above on the 4070 Ti, right? You get that little bit extra headroom. And then at the 4K resolution, that headroom was increased a little bit more on the 4070 Ti. But my problem with buying either of these GPUs for 4K is that 12 gigabyte VRAM buffer. At 1440p, 12 gigabytes is fine right now, although we're already seeing some of the most recent releases push right up to that 12 gigabytes at 1440p, meaning that the longevity of everything being maxed out at 1440p without the VRAM being an issue is definitely something to think about. But at 1440p, you're at least good for now, right? The question is more like good for how long? Whereas at 4K resolution, we already do see some games going over 12 gigabytes of VRAM. And not only that, neither of these GPUs is maxing out 4K at 60 FPS without turning down settings or using upscaling. Now, turning down settings and using upscaling both lower the VRAM capacity, so maybe that helps you out. So I'm not saying you couldn't consider these GPUs for 4K, just realize that they don't have a ton of VRAM, and they're also not going to be maxed out the latest AAA games at 4K. I will say that if you're buying one of these two GPUs for 4K, I do think having that extra performance on the 4070 Ti would be a nice to have. I think that you might want to also start looking at your AMD alternatives because they can give you more VRAM and more performance at these same price points. So I have other videos focusing on that. I have the $600 4070 up against the 6950 XT, which from AMD is also coming in right around $600 right now on the cheapest models. Some of the other ones are closer to $650. It gets you 16 gigabytes of VRAM instead of 12, but you lose out on a bunch of the NVIDIA features, and it's also way less energy efficient. So you'll have worse upscaling, no frame generation. There's a promise of FSR 3 competing with that sometime in the future. We don't have that now. And this is going to be drawing well over 100 watts more power, and it's going to be much larger. You might have trouble fitting it in your case. So I would highly recommend you watch my video focused on the 6950 XT versus the 4070 before actually buying a GPU in the $600 price class. And if you're looking at the $800 price class, the 7900 XT from AMD is not this, so I don't know why PC Part Picker is pulling that up, but we are getting them available around $780 to $800, so very similar price point to the 4070 Ti, but with 20 gigabytes of VRAM instead of 12, however, and a little bit faster when you're not using ray tracing. Then you've got better ray tracing performance to think about for the 4070 Ti. You've got better upscaling with DLSS. You've got the frame generation feature. So I'm not saying definitely buy the 7900 XT over the 4070 Ti. I'm saying watch my video focused on that for a lot more thoughts on that before buying in these price points. But if you are just looking at the 4070 versus the 4070 Ti, you've already decided you're going NVIDIA and you're just deciding, is the extra $200 worth it? I mean, from a value proposition, no. The 4070 Ti is definitely offering worse performance per dollar, right? Each dollar you spend is buying you less frames per second on the 4070 Ti, Although from an absolute perspective, if you can afford both, then the 4070 Ti is getting you noticeably faster performance. And so there does come that point where you've decided you're buying NVIDIA and you've decided you could spend up to $800. Well, the $800 does get you noticeably better performance, but it's just not very good performance per dollar, even relative to the 4070, which, anyway, watch my other comparison videos on that one. Hopefully this video was useful for you making your decision. And again, you could try upscaling your earning potential by looking at a new career, resume templates to help you out from our sponsor HubSpot in the video description and pinned comment. I hope all of you have an excellent day.